gone way too long without covering the Indiana Hoosiers, who've been the biggest Cinderella story of all of college football this year. And I felt a deep obligation to cover them, really a great obligation, actually, to to cover this team, especially watching College Game Day this weekend. I had the chills when I was watching Lee Corso and him going back and talking to all his players, and they were discussing 1979 Holiday Bowl. And then after that, you had a badass interview from Curt Cignetti, who just really just talked about how important it was for the students at Indiana University to be there this year. And also just I also could just go back to that press conference at the beginning of the season where, they were asking, hey, what should you expect from Indiana this year? And it's just the now famous line of, hey, I just win, Google me. And for, those of you who don't have much background on Curt Cignetti, he spent 2 seasons at Elon. He was also a Division II coach, and after Elon, he was also at James Madison for 5 years, where he navigated their transition from FCS football to FBS under the Sun Belt division now. And his record all time right now is 127-35, and it's just been incredible to watch this transformation of this program. Who under Tom Allen, nothing against Tom Allen, he's a great defensive mind, but it's historically speaking, Indiana has been such a difficult program to maneuver for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, before you're consistently playing the Big Ten, you don't have as many resources as some of the other schools who take football a little bit more seriously, and most importantly, you just don't have the weapons that you did before. But it seemed like this year that Cignetti did a number of things to really excel this program a lot quicker than I think everybody could objectively realize. I mean, just a couple quick stats here. Curtis Rourke, who's their quarterback. He is fortunately going through a thumb surgery now, but he was a transfer from the University of Ohio, who's had an incredible year so far. And also they brought in 31 transfers. And they brought in 31 transfers, which is the third or fourth most in FBS, I believe is the stat on that. And also they have averaged 35 point margin on their victories this year, as they've coasted through Nebraska winning 56-7. And they also have some key victories versus UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern, and Florida International as well. And when you look at this team, 8-0 for the first time since 1967, I think all of those things are, well documented and noteworthy, and all the praise in the world goes to this Indiana team. Now, what I'm asking myself now is, what exactly is Indiana's ceiling for the rest of the season? Because as I watched Indiana versus Nebraska, and for this segment, I went back and watched some of their old games, and the big question is, the big question I ask myself is, what's the ceiling now? Because for the most part, there's not a lot of clear weaknesses on this team, because for the most part, when you go back and think about the Washington game last week, they had a number of turnovers that they caused. I think there was a pick six as well. So that's pick six at the very beginning of the game. So that's one element of it. And when they brought in Taven Jackson, he did a good job stepping in, especially for the amount of pressure that he was under. You have a kind of a sneaky Washington team under their first year of Jed Fish, and for all things considered, their backs were against the wall to some degree, because I think a lot of people were expecting a much slower start from Indiana, which we did get. But when they were settled in, Taven Jackson just enough to get this team going and ultimately led him to victory. But I think he deserves a lot of credit for making some really good reads out there, being successful on third down, and most importantly, staying poised in the moment and continuing this momentum that we've been seeing up to this point. And also, shout out to the rushing attack too for helping Tavon Jackson and this offensive staff navigate, such an important game without having your quarterback as well. Five touchdowns on 5 rushing touchdowns in this game. And I think what's most essential, or what's the most noteworthy about that stat, is going into that game, Washington didn't give up a single rushing touchdown going into the season. And then if we go back last week versus Nebraska, same exact storyline where Indiana was able to get two rushing touchdowns, and up to that point, Nebraska didn't give up a single rushing touchdown. So having Indiana being able to win in a multitude of ways and being able to get some explosive plays leading up to the play action, and also getting your running game going enough to the point where you really do have to respect both sides of the football. It's one of those things where it's a recipe for success. And as we move forward, you have Michigan State team who played Michigan pretty tough this past weekend, and also upsetted Iowa too. So that game would definitely be intriguing too, especially since they're on the road. But assuming they can get through Michigan, who has been horrific and on offensively, and their defense at this point can only carry them so much. So I think as of right now, I would certainly anticipate that being a victory. But when you look at this, obviously the big game that everyone has penciled in is that Ohio State game. And if both these teams do end up being undefeated, you definitely kind of have to ask yourself, how is Indiana going to be able to match up against all those playmakers that Ohio State has offensively? Because, I've talked about Ohio State a couple of different times in this program, and I also released a preview of Ohio State versus Penn State that outlines that game as well, which I would highly recommend checking out. But it's a big moment for Indiana, and you have to ask yourself too, if you're Indiana, is their resume going to be strong enough to get them one of those open bids for a college football playoff when you have a number of SEC teams lurking, you have a really competitive race in the ACC, and you also have a Big 12 that as of right now is still completely open. So there's just no margin for error. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself too, it's not like Indiana's just kind of squeaking by compared to some of these other bigger schools and that we've seen, and that definitely has to be taken into account too. It's just, where are you finding that balance too? Because right now, everything in Bloomington, Indiana, it's buzzing there. It's exciting. It's been such a great story to I guess be a part of in a sense too, as a fan. And I always have to remind myself at the end of the day, that's what the show is really all about, and that's what's great about being a college football fan more than anything, is being able to kind of live through the Indiana fans in the sense of seeing the crowd get all excited, bringing some life, bringing some much needed energy. And most importantly, it's also just kind of refreshing too, being able to watch Big Ten football and it not just be about Ohio State and Michigan every year. So when you get those factors in, and of course too, I'm guilty of this just like everybody else, but I love a good underdog story too. So this is definitely going to be one of those programs that I hope I could be checking into later into the season, and hopefully that they're a sort of a 10-2, 11-1 situation, or even hell, why not them go undefeated? when, you had College Game Day there, you had Lee Corso there, you're whooping everybody, selling out 53,000 people every time you're home, and you've played well on the road this year too. But right now, that little bit of a stretch, finishing your conference play out is going to be key in order for them to be the difference between, how far can the Cinderella story go? Is it just going to be that, they went 11-1 and just and got into a bowl game, or can it be that they actually cause some trouble and wreak some havoc a little bit? Because I think regardless of when how far Indiana goes, it's definitely been one hell of a year for a guy for Curt Cignetti, who's won everywhere he's went, deserves all the recognition of the world, and you can tell that these kids are clearly rallying around him, and he's talked the talk and he's walked the walk,